Hello, my name is Anne.
Oh, and hi, my name's Angus, and I've been asked to say a little bit about worship and work, and so Anne is going to ask me the questions because I tried to do this by myself and it just went completely off beam. I couldn't do it, so here we go with a bit of structure. Right.
So Angus, can you tell us what your job was before you retired?
Okay. Well, I was a psychiatrist. I started in mental health in 1987, and I was appointed as a consultant psychiatrist for adult mental health. So that's 18 to 65-year-old people in 1994. And then I kind of rose through the ranks, and towards the end of my career, I was the senior clinical director for Tees and Wear Valley's Mental Health Trust. And also I was the mental health lead for the North of England, working with NHS England teams on regional and national strategy.
Thank you. So, you're a psychiatrist. What do you think your best known work was?
Okay, the sort of the thing I was probably best known for was innovation and reshaping and reorganizing services, and in particular delivering increased quality services at a time of massive austerity. I mean, at the moment in the political headlines is the government's U-turn, if you like, on the 2012 Health and Social Care Act, which was introduced by David Cameron's government, which I have to say ruined a lot of the work I was doing. But certainly following the banking crisis before that, we really were strapped for cash. And so I became known for being able to deliver reorganized and reshaped services that produced better outcomes for less money. And in particular, inpatient care, where I introduced an innovation of daily report out reviews that led to a huge reduction in violence and aggression in inpatient environments. So
that's what you think other people would see. What do you think personally is your best achievement at work?
I mean, off the top of my head, my immediate reaction, my best achievement is retaining a dependence on God, I think, and a perspective of Him blessing me throughout my career. I think that there is absolutely nothing I've done in my own strength, really. I've had an incredibly blessed career. I felt that God has been with me from every step of the way. I think the mentoring and developing people as a result of that, as a result of keeping a sense of perspective and being grounded. I mean, my faith has just grounded me, and my ego never sort of got invested in my work, which is why I was able to retire without too much difficulty, despite being quite important when I retired, which isn't to brag. It's just, it's a fact. But the fact is that what I'm pleased with is that God has kept me safe. He's kept my heart humble, and I didn't feel bothered about being important. So.
Okay. So the next one is a bit on a more spiritual track, although that was a very spiritual answer. So what do you think worship is?
Well, the specific thing is to think about worship as part of your working life. My answer to that is, I suppose, that in my view, worship is no different whether you are singing songs, whether you are at work, or whether you're with your family or on holiday. It is no different. It's part of being close to God and being present with Him in everything you do. That's, for me, worship, because worship is drawing near to God. And
can you give us a practical example at work how that is in real life?
Oh, having an internal conversation with God. I mean, like, for example, when I got to the level of regional and national strategy, there were many times when I could be in a position of actually chairing meetings and I really wasn't entirely sure I understood the agenda, and in particular some of the complex issues. And I would just quietly pray, from the Psalms, that I was to maintain the reality that I was like a weaned child, and that understanding was far from me, and therefore I depended on my Heavenly Father to give me understanding. And it was the same often with sort of complex patients. Sometimes, fairly often, you might be completely flummoxed, and you might know what the problem is, you might know what a diagnosis is, but that's not helpful. You've got to find a roadmap for the patient to get out of the difficulties they're in, and sometimes that is really, really hard. In particular, when you're working for organisations that are very defensive-minded, and you can't actually necessarily do everything you'd like to do. So yes, it's just a sense of being grounded in constantly retaining that childlike dependence on God's wisdom.
Okay. So you might have already answered this one, but how do you see worship in your role as a psychiatrist?
It was always to pursue excellence, actually, to pursue excellence in my work with God. I always saw God and me as working together in parallel, and that he was always ahead and I was always following. And I've always viewed it in terms of of Jesus's response to, how did he sum up the whole of the law and the prophets? What was the most important commandment, he was asked. And I've always thought this is the perfect mandate for working in mental health. It was to love God with all my heart and all my soul and all my strength, but equally to love my neighbour as myself, and my neighbour being my staff, team, my people that I was leading within the organisation, and my patients. That the thing that used to make me angry would be when patients and staff members weren't being treated with compassion, and so I would see worship at work as being constantly grounded in the closeness of God and his compassion. And compassion is an interesting thing. It requires courage. It often, in fact, nearly always requires courage. You've got to be you have courage to be compassionate to other people, to be compassionate to oneself, and to face up to suffering, because it's always about suffering. Compassion is always about approaching suffering, and it might be your own suffering from stress or distress at work, or the stress of others. And we can choose to turn away from it, or we can choose to turn towards it. And I would hope that, not always, but I would hope that most of the time I turned towards suffering and brought God's compassion to that position.
Okay. I was going to ask you, have you ever found a situation where it's more difficult to see God and to worship him at work? Positions where you just felt you weren't doing that, where you weren't worshipping as you worked?
Well, when the pace becomes almost impossible, when you are so many competing demands for your time that you become really ragged. That's when you sometimes just have to endure. But still we can still cry out, and we can cry out for endurance. But that's particularly towards the end of my career, when I had 3 major roles simultaneously, and the amount of time I had was not enough. It just wasn't enough.
That's great. One thing, can you summarise in a sentence how you would advise other people to worship at work or through work?
Always remember that God is right by you, and be present. Be present in that sense. When I say be present, I mean I attend to the little ways that God speaks to us during the day, and the little opportunities that he gives us through our relationships, and that is the most key thing. It's relationships at work are probably much more important than the work at work in reality. I think it's how we are with people that's always the most important thing.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you. Hope that's helpful.